I'm going to let Dana ask you about your very recent VR research. I know that you have, when I Googled it, you have 191,337 citations on Google Scholar alone.
Oh my God.
But
Oh,
since
that can't all be me, right? Somebody else must be looking at it. That's great.
they're citing you, they're citing you. But this article is very, very new. So we're very excited to ask you about it, especially, given the preliminary results. So I'll let Dana take it away.
Yeah. So switching gears, so in your recent article, The Promise and Pitfalls of Learning in Immersive Virtual Reality, you and your co-authors state that a pitfall of learning in immersive virtual reality is that high immersion can create distractions in the form of increased emotional arousal and increased levels of interesting but irrelevant perceptual richness. So my question is, given the duality of IVR being both engaging and distracting, what can learning designers do to reduce distractions while trying to retain engagement? And I know you mentioned a few examples in the article, but if you could elaborate on that.
Sure. I think immersive virtual reality has a lot of potential, so it's kind of attracted our attention. I'm not interested in technology per se. I just want to use technology to help people learn. So and we all know it's not technology that causes learning, it's the instructional method and content that causes learning. But if we're going to use, a medium like IVR, I want to understand, what are the principles that we should apply, given the nature of our human information processing system. And we know we have a very limited capacity for processing information. And VR is a very rich world that has a lot of perceptual richness. It has a lot of also motor activity. So if your working memory is focusing on a lot of the wow factor that's going on in VR, it's not processing the content if it's an instructional lesson. So I think that is our challenge. The VR is very motivating. It's arousing. So, we've done research with just biometric measures. People are more aroused in VR. They show more of an emotional response. They certainly like it more. They want more of that experience. So that's all good. But then we have to figure out, how can we harness that motivational power of VR to help people learn? Because we also have studies that show people actually do better on a test if we just give them a PowerPoint presentation rather than a VR experience. So that's depressing a little bit. So here are a couple techniques that I think I think you laid out the challenge really well. How do we keep the motivating properties of immersive virtual reality, but minimize the distracting features? So kind of just borrowing from our multimedia principles, one approach is pre-training. So I think we could give people more experience in VR. Most of the subjects in our studies have never had a head-mounted display on before. They've never been in VR before. So we're still at a point, in the development of this technology where a lot of people still haven't really used it. You kind of think everybody must be doing this, but most of our subjects in our experiments, so these are 18-year-olds in California, we think everybody's high tech. Most of them have not been in VR before. So giving them more experience in VR so they just get more used to it, that might reduce the distraction. That's one approach. Another is just pre-training with the material itself, so that they kind of know, what are the main ideas you're going to learn about here, so they know what to focus on, and they're kind of thinking about that. And another aspect is training in executive function, so you have better control of your attention, you have better control of not focusing on distracting things and focusing on the core material. So we've got a ways to go on understanding how to train for executive function, but that's another kind of pre-training. So pre-training is one way, I think, to handle this that would kind of minimize the distraction in VR. Another approach is segmenting. So, and we've tried this in our lab. So just take an experience. I mean, people can't really be in it for too long. I think it starts to be a drag. So we've kind of tried to limit the experiences to 10, 15, 20 minutes at the most. So we try to break that down into segments. So, and maybe take a 15-minute experience and break it down into 5 segments. And after each segment, you have to engage in a generative activity, like summarize the main ideas that you just learned, or explain what you've just learned to somebody else. How would you do that? So having them engage in some kind of a generative activity like that after each segment, I think helps them reflect on what they're learning, and it reminds them, hey, I'm supposed to learn something from this. It's not just like a movie. I'm supposed to actually get some content out of this. So we have found that to be effective. And then also just using good multimedia design principles like signaling, temporal contiguity, where if there's a voice, the voice is talking about what's really happening right now. And also spatial contiguity. If there's print, it should be next to the thing it's referring to. So I think those would help too. So I think there are lots of things we can do. And my fear is with virtual reality, people are going to start to give up on it because they're going to find out it's not as effective. It's not as effective as more conventional methods maybe, and it's a lot more costly to set up. So before that happens, I want to see if we can come up with some good design principles for VR, because I think it has a lot of potential, especially for certain kinds of learning situations. So did that kind of address your question?
Yeah, these are all good suggestions and tips. And I'm curious to see where VR goes. I've never, done it myself, but
yeah, I haven't done it that much either, because I want to stay somewhat naive about it, but I do have to at least be in our experiments. I'm always blown away when I put on that head mounted display, and this is just like with an Oculus Quest or a HTC Vive, which are pretty inexpensive off the shelf systems. It's, to me, pretty amazing, because we did our first VR studies in the late 90s, actually. So there was no off-the-shelf equipment. We had to just build everything ourselves with the hardware. And okay, now and you had to wear like a little backpack with all the equipment in it, because there was just so much, and you had to write your own code. Now it's so much easier. So it seems like there's a lot of potential, and there's a lot of off-the-shelf programs and off-the-shelf systems. So I think we need to understand how to use it in a productive way.